Hello, fellow detectives. Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast for all things Nancy Drew by Her Interactive. I am your host, Tammy Tuckey, and this week we welcome voiceover artist Valerie Moseley to the show. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited because Message in the Haunted Mansion, everybody already knows this, but it's my favorite game. It's actually the first Nancy Drew game I played. So to get to speak to the Abbie is so exciting for me.
That's great.
I think everybody on that cast list except Scott Carty, who played Charlie and still is the voice of Ned, Nancy's boyfriend, in the series. In the series, I had not been able to track down or get in touch with. So thank you so much for, at least responding to my fan message first.
Yeah, thanks to the wonder of Facebook. Isn't that crazy? How many, you can find people now?
It was just by chance that I was like, oh, I'll give Facebook a shot again because I couldn't find you originally. And then I found you and I was like, oh my gosh, it's fate.
Well, and also IMDb until very recently had my last name spelled wrong. So it was probably a little tricky to track me down.
I really wanted to hear like your story on becoming a voiceover artist because you were Seattle based and you still are. So what kind of inspired you to be a part of one of these original Nancy Drew games in '98?
Yeah. I had been in the theater world forever and also in the music world forever. And I went to the Del Arte International School of Physical Theater down in northern California. And you would think that's like the exact opposite of voiceover work because physical theater is getting up and moving around. And, you might even put mime in the world of physical theater, which is like most decidedly not a verbal art. But, and don't worry, I'm not a mime, but they have something in common in that they both, physical theater does, there is a lot of scripted work in that world, but there is also a lot of improvisational work or semi-improvisational work or work that is generated through improv. And what all that has is that you are not memorizing material. And I'm not really a fan of memorizing. I'm not great at it. And turns out voiceover work is also something where you don't have to memorize. You get your script and it's there in front of you. And while you don't want to be like eyeballs locked to the page, I've never read this before. Oh my God, this is totally spontaneous. You want to come in with some preparation. It's still something where you don't need to be totally off book. You can be there with the material in front of you and working with it. So, I've definitely been in plays and shows where I've worked with memorized material. That's not like my guiding light of like, okay, I'm not going to do it if I have to memorize. But it is kind of a handy thing because memorization isn't my strong suit. And so it's funny how that is a little connection there. And then also, I would just say this isn't really an answer to your question, but I've always been drawn to voice work just as a concept. When I was a little kid, people told me I had a cool voice. And mostly that was because I was the youngest, not only in my family, but in the entire neighborhood. And so what that meant was that I was the littlest kid and I was working hard to get heard. And so I would have to scream over everybody and my voice went hoarse. And when you have a scratchy voice at age 8, people call you like this funky little Lauren Bacall kind of thing. And so I always kind of played around with that and thought that would be a cool thing. And then, of course, what happened was that I got a healthier voice after time went on, and I lost that vocal fry. But it was still kind of, that seed was planted. So I'm saying this as if I've had this, incredible, illustrious, long career as a voiceover artist, and that was the, funny beginning. Honestly, I haven't done nearly as much voice work as I would like. I got started with a few commercials before the Haunted Mansion, and then did a Haunted Mansion, and then honestly, I got pulled back into the theater world and haven't really touched it for quite some time, and am honestly missing it now that there's this whole world of Audible books out there. I have so many friends who have little home studios, and I hear about them doing their book work, and I just get so jealous. It just seems like so much fun and such a wonderful thing. And I think jealousy is a nice, if you can listen to it and not act on it in a negative way, it's a little indicator of where you want to be and what you should be doing. So there's been a long gap in between, about which I'm a little embarrassed, but that's the way life took me. So, yeah.
If I read a book, you're going to read it. It would be great. Because I really love the character work you did for Abbie. But originally in the audition process, were they instructing you on how they wanted her to sound? Or did you just come in with something you had prepared with the side to say, hey, okay, here is what I would like to bring to the table from what I could read?
A little of both. I think a successful audition is one where you come in with some choices made, and then it improves when you, let's say this. A successful audition is one where you come in with some choices made, and then you have the flexibility to work with the folks that are auditioning you. So my recollection is that I didn't have the sides for very long, but that and they truly were sides. So we didn't have a lot of context. So you do kind of have to just make a choice. You don't have like the full background. And just as a side note, I think I listened to a couple of other podcasts in your series here, and I think other people had the same experience I did, which is they really didn't tell us the whole story. They wanted to keep it, kind of a secret for everybody, so that we were all kind of, not in the know. So, we were out of context in the sense that you usually do get a side anyway, but then in particular that was not revealed to us, who done it. So anyway, so I came in with some choices, and then I, my recollection is not super strong because this was quite a while ago, but I do remember working with them a little bit and getting some feedback, particularly in the area of the, the seance-y moments, because those needed to be kind of hocus pocusy.
When I played the game recently, it's really interesting because you can hear that the ghost Valdez, I guess the pronunciation of those specific lines, you could tell it's you, but it's been dropped a couple octaves. It's definitely you, and it's supposed to be, especially since it's Abbie, we find out later on. Sorry, spoilers, but you knew they were coming. But, it's just interesting how they kind of played around with your voice a couple times. It's really fun.
Yeah, it is. And my recollection also is that I didn't know that in the recording, and that then I listened to the game later and I was like, oh, okay. That's what we're doing.
Did you ever meet the other voice cast members from the series?
Right. So I would yes and no, in the sense that no, I was recording by myself, and at the time I didn't know who was who or what was up. But in retrospect, I have met other people, and just because life happens that way. So I didn't meet them, and we didn't all go like, oh my God, you were in that game with me. But Shannon Kipp, who, I've forgotten the name of the character that she plays, but she's kind of the old lady on the phone. And she's someone that I've known forever. And I was actually looking through, again, through your podcast list a little while ago, and I was like, oh, I know her. Oh, I know him. Oh, I know her. And, Seattle's a big town. It's also a small town.
Yes.
And a lot of folks know each other. And one of the funniest connections was somebody that I met years after doing the project, and it turns out he was the guy who wrote a lot of the dialogue for the game, Robert Riedel. And he's an interesting character, nice guy, and we were sort of introduced to each other through a mutual theater friend, and then he was like, wait a minute. And I was, wait a minute. So
Wow.
He recognized me, of course, before I recognized him, because he had a lot more involvement with the game, after my, before and after my time with it. So I didn't meet them at the time, and we certainly weren't there together in the recording studio. But our paths have crossed many, many different intersections across the years.
It was funny because the one fight scene with Abbie and Rose sounds as if you guys are really going at it, in a booth. So I kind of assumed, oh, maybe they did at least record this one part, but I guess they didn't.
Nope. The way it works is that, you're there in the studio, and if you're really going at it with someone, then you've got somebody on the other side of the glass feeding you lines.
Mm-hmm. And then they kind of merge it together for the final product.
Yeah. And, that seems in some ways inefficient, but I think that's just the way, it's been set up, the way it works. That's kind of how voiceover mechanics go.
Did you get to play the game when it came out then? Just to see, what it was going to sound and look like?
So I was frustrated by that let's say my efforts to play the game were frustrated because at the time the game was only available on CD-ROMs for PCs, and I owned a Mac, and so I couldn't get at it. So I had a copy of it, but I had to play it after hours at my day job, so I didn't have a whole lot of time, and I didn't get very far in the game because of that. And so I don't remember how else I watched it. I think I borrowed it from other people's computers and such. But I've honestly never been able to really experience the whole game. And for that, I've got to thank YouTube, because now there's this whole phenomenon of people playing games and recording themselves and then posting the event or the experience on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm sure you're familiar, maybe you aren't, but I imagine you are, but there seems to be one particular guy out there who's doing a lot of Nancy Drew game playing and putting himself up on YouTube, and he's, I think, a character in and of himself.
Michael, yes, he listens to the show, I think. So, hi, Michael.
Yeah, shout out. It's a very big puzzle to build, and I'm impressed by that. I've actually myself gotten a little bit into board game design recently, and I've been trying to build a kind of a similar game, but non-digital, where you would sort of have somebody acting as the piece of software, if you know what I mean. Maybe in the D&D terms, that would be the dungeon master, somebody who's kind of running the experience or the gameplay. And I'm stumped at how many options there could be to guide a group of people or one person through an experience where you would, be running into successes and failures and all the different ways to succeed or fail, and being making the game fun enough that you want to play it multiple times, but not making it so complicated that it would last you hours and hours and hours and hours to play. And I feel like, I've had an appreciation for that kind of design work. I think it takes a lot of planning and brain and skills and efforts. And I only aspire to that someday, to be able to build such an experience. I think it's an amazing thing.
Were you at any audition calls for, later games?
I think it was pretty distinctive, which is unfortunate because I would have loved to have come back, and maybe they didn't get to see my range. I do like to do other characters, but in some ways I feel like Abbie got to take advantage of my smooth voice that I get to do. And So, yeah, I unfortunately was not invited back, and I like to chalk it up to the fact that I do have maybe a somewhat distinctive voice, and not to the fact that they just didn't want me back because they didn't think I was right or good or whatever. So, yeah, and now there are so many games out there. It feels like time to toss my hat in the ring, and
That would be great. I'd love to hear you back in a game.
yeah, that would be fun.
Did you ever think of, overall, I love the concept of the bed and breakfast. If you could open a bed and breakfast yourself anywhere in the world, where would you like to open one?
Oh, my. That is a good question. Well, the Haunted Mansion one actually resonated a lot for me because I grew up in the Bay Area. So to the concept of a B&B like in a Victorian in San Francisco was so very familiar that it's hard for me to imagine anything else. Of course, if you go slightly north of that, you're in like Mendocino and those kinds of maybe slightly rural places where you might get the cutesy B&Bs. So I could do that. I was going to say I could do it right here in Seattle. But then here nowadays, in something that didn't exist when that game was built, is the Airbnb world. So you'd be competing against all those folks. You might be digging for, she would open it up in France or, some exotic location, overseas. I'm actually not a very good traveler, so I don't sit around and daydream of, if I could only be in the English countryside. I mean, I would love to be there, but then you'd have to drug me, get me on the plane completely unconscious, and then get me over there, and then I'd be fine. But I don't fly well, so that might be a little tricky. But yeah, that's a really good question. If you care about mansions and mysteries, you may have heard of the Winchester Mystery House.
Yes.
And I think they recently made a movie about Sarah Winchester. And I gather it was not commercially super successful. But I actually grew up right near the what we call the Winchester Mystery House. I think it's just called the Winchester House by a lot of people. But it's a very interesting little oddity of history because Sarah Winchester was such a character, and she's sort of famous for never ending the construction in the house. For different people tell different stories, but the sort of spooky stories that she did it to ward off the ghosts, or she did it out of anxiety for feeling like she was living off the fortune of the Winchester rifles, which were, there was blood on her hands for, these rifles having killed so many people and so on. And so it's got this spooky thing, and it's kind of cool. On the other hand, it's in the middle of, it's right on the border between San Jose and Santa Clara. And it was right where literally there's like a huge multiplex right next door. Like they share the same parking lot. So there's this old kind of weird Victorian mansion in the parking lot of a huge multiplex theater, like movie theater. And, right behind like the backyard of the Winchester Mystery House is the 280 freeway. The spooky factor, the creepy factor is kind of diminished by the fact that this place is like in the middle of this really crazy suburban sprawl. Like just down the corner is Stevens Creek Boulevard, which is like huge multi-lane auto row, kind of like every automobile dealership is on Stevens Creek Boulevard. It's just a huge street with this little artifact of this old Victorian, very storied mansion plopped or left over in the middle of it with all this crazy building around it. And so when we were kids, it was not spooky. It was kind of a joke, and then I had a friend who worked there, like in the concession stand selling nachos in high school, like to sell nachos at the Winchester Mystery House is such a, it's like this junky thing. And so I went to arts camp for theater and music in high school out in Michigan. And, you're in a cabin with people in the woods. And so inevitably ghost stories come up. And I remember one time, one fellow cabin mate started telling the story of this woman who, was the heir to the fortune of the Winchester rifles. And she's building and building and building on her house, staircases that go nowhere, all this stuff. And I was like, suddenly it dawned on me, ow, that's the Winchester Mystery House right next to the Century Theaters on Stevens Creek Boulevard. It was just this funny contrast.
I always loved the music of this particular game too. Abbie's Room has this like essence that is so, I guess, spiritual and mystical, and I always love when I go in the room that music plays, and I just think it's I have it on my iPod actually. I think it's just so unusual and inspired, and it really makes you feel like you're there. So when I play it, I'm like, oh, I'm in Abbie's room in my car.
That's great.
So I love listening to those tracks. I think they're just so unique in the production of it, and it really helps you when you're in the game. You feel like you're there.
Well, I have a background in music. I was never a composer, and I just have such admiration for those who can come up with music that is evocative and sets the tone and puts you right in it. Because that can make a really huge difference. That same scene with, AC/DC playing in the background would tell you a whole different story.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, you would have totally different thoughts about why you were there and what Abbie was up to and, everything. And Abbie certainly has that sort of, I'll say, maybe hippie side or, she's, and yeah, it does kind of, it goes with that.
Do you have any projects you can tell us about that you're currently working on, or a website that our listeners can check out?
I have spent the last few years being a tax accountant.
Wow.
So I have let a little bit of that drop away. Though recently I did the first episode in a web series called Jose and the Hawk. And it's an interesting piece. It's, comedy. It's a spin on the old Starsky and Hutch TV show. And the Starsky and Hutch pair are made up of one detective or, police officer detective who is human and who's Jose. And then the other one is a hawk who is played by a puppet. And so it's just a funny starting place. And in this episode, I play someone whose house was vandalized, and they come and try to solve the mystery for me. So I won't give any spoilers because I think they are done with their first first kind of pass on the post-production, and they've got another round to go. And then I'm not sure what platform it's coming out on, but they have a Facebook page, and I'm sure you can get some details there. So that's kind of my latest project, and it's fun. And then we'll see what goes from there. I'm actually trying to kind of dial down on my life as a tax accountant right now, and I'm getting a little burnout there, even though I still love being an accountant, but it's a little too much. So I've been daydreaming. I have a whole list of like what I will do when I don't have to work 60 hours a week as an accountant, and voiceover is on that. I have an old reel, but it needs to be updated. So as soon as I do, I'll send you over a link to that, so we can get rolling again. And
I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This has been a real treat. Thank you so much for being an awesome Abbie. I really do appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, you are so welcome. It means something that my time brought you some joy, and I'm thinking, if you enjoyed it, then there were probably some other people who did too. So that's terrific.
Let me end with our last question. If you could describe your experience working with Her Interactive and being a part of the Nancy Drew universe using one word, what would that be?
I'm just going to say fun.